I think today, thanks to economic growth of the last 30 years, we are overdoing it on the other end of saying, oh, we have arrived, we are a great power, we are Vishwaguru. I think overdoing this is actually will create problems.
Hi, sir. In this week's column in Rajamandala, you've looked at the sort of geopolitical scenario globally in terms of how India is placed now vis-a-vis 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, as the NDA and Prime Minister Modi's third term begins. There are five fundamental things you point out, a new Panchashila, which everyone should look at. They should read the piece. It's on the IndianExpress.com. Just a couple of questions. So, the first, one of the things that has been praised actually about Indian foreign policy in recent times is the way it's managed in an era of conflict, especially with regard to the Ukraine conflict, to still sort of keep the lines open with Russia, continue to trade there, as well as stay close to the West, or even perhaps hope to deepen those relationships. And that's been tom-tommed a lot. But do you think how sustainable is that in the future? That's one of the axes you talk
Yeah.
about, this new Cold War of sorts.
Yeah, I think it's been so far so good, but my sense is as the conflict in Ukraine escalates, there is going to be even bigger problem. I mean, for India, because of India's relevance in Asia and rebalancing Asia, the US was willing to cut a lot of slack for India on the Ukraine and the oil purchases issue. But as ever new round of sanctions come into force, India's ability to do business with Russia will come under a shadow. And whatever the government might say, Indian banks are not going to get entangled with the US secondary sanctions effects. So I think it's all right. So far, as I said, I mean, we managed it. But my sense is if the geopolitical conflict intensifies, as it looks to, then I think the challenge would be more demanding on India. Second, I think on the China question, this idea that, look, we can manage this on our own, I mean, has also become a problematic one, given the growing gap in the power between China and India. Therefore, you'll need other partners to manage China's challenge to India. So all this, I think, demand a more interest-based calculation, because after all, to say I have nice relations with everyone, that's not an end in itself. Second, so the two issues, right? You see, are we willing to stand up for the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which has been violated by Russia? Though we always talk about sovereignty, territorial integrity, but we're not willing to take a position. It's understandable because you have good relationship with Russia. But the fact is that leaves you, in a sense, exposed to criticisms of double standards, etc. But that's not everyone is hypocritical on the international side. But the real question is, what do you do as the conflict escalates? And especially given our interests with the rest of Europe are much higher than with Russia. So are you going to sacrifice those interests because you want to be good to all sides? That question has not been asked. But at some point, I think that question will have to be asked. What are the costs of continuing to duck the issue on the Russian aggression against Ukraine? So far, we managed it, but I think at some point, those issues will come to the fore. Whether others want to do it or not, the sheer weight of sanctions is going to force the debate.
So there are two others. Let me club those two together. There's on both economic reform, but also now critical technologies. We are partnering with the U.S. National Security Advisor is, I think, still in Delhi as we are talking. And there's a lot of talk on, say, ICT, just from semiconductors to AI, the collaboration or quantum computing. There is a sense that actually for all our tech human prowess and some for 4 or 5 companies, on that front, India is not actually a global leader in a meaningful sense, even compared in terms of that on the innovation front. That asymmetry, do you think, what kind of policy interventions should the government be looking at, or how much can the government do, in fact, to push that system to the go? Yeah.
No, I think, Indian manpower traditionally trained in the institutes of technology is in great demand around the world. So they've made great contributions. But I think in India itself, the fact that they've all gone abroad tells you our system is not geared to absorb that capacity or to leverage it fully. Part of the problem has been the research on S&T, especially in the advanced sectors, has totally been a government enterprise. The departments of
Yeah.
of government's atomic energy space research. They've left very little room for private sector to participate in. Last few years have seen India, open up some of the sectors. Space sector has been opened up. There is talk about reforming the Defense Research and Development Organization. So in some senses, what was necessary in the 1950s when we started out, that the government is the only one which could invest in these programs.
Yeah.
But we've not made any changes that to structure, which is essentially government-led, department-led advanced technologies. But today, I think if you look at the world, I mean, in the US, it is the private sector that is driving a large amount of changes. So I think we need to let the private capacities to participate in the development of new technologies. For example, on the ISET, one of the issues is, look, how do you create the ecosystem in India to produce, say, aircraft engines, to develop, design of semiconductors? One of the issues that is being talked about in the ISET now is to design specific electronic chips for military use. So I think this way the partnerships coming. If we say, look, we're not there in comparison to China. Therefore, partnerships become important. Partnerships alone won't do the trick. If you don't do internal reform, if you don't modify the conditions under which science and technology is supervised within India. And two, what is the state of education then becomes. There was a time when IITs were global leaders, but today the questions in terms of too much of government control, too much of too many IITs, some people say. So I think that question, how do you strengthen the basic talent that exists in this country with highly skilled manpower that we need? Because while we're servicing the world, the demand is going to rise both in India and abroad. So I think manpower training, building scientific institutions, giving them strategic autonomy to develop on their own, rather than a very centralized, Ministry of Education and Human Resource Development in Delhi trying to control everything. That again, I think is a reform that we need, but we'll see whether it's actually possible or not.
So then one of the points you made now is that, now third term, there are some figures and some things that become more important for rhetoric. The sort of 5 trillion, third largest, second largest economy on the one hand. Is there a danger? I mean, it can have its place even in politics. We saw that in the campaign, though. Now but do you think that there is people are buying into their own, that they're drinking their own Kool-Aid, as the Americans say? Do you think that's happening, and the dangers of?
Yeah, there is a danger. I think in the past there was too much of a defensive attitude, and we called ourselves developing country, underdeveloped, third world. So in some senses, though India had a lot of capacities, I mean, going back to 1950, India's in the top 10 economies at the time. But yet the culture of seeing ourselves as victim, as a third world country, that been, so that kind of put you on a mode of protesting dissent mode. I think today, thanks to economic growth of the last 30 years, we are overdoing it on the other end of saying, oh, we have arrived, we are a great power, we are Vishwaguru. I think overdoing this is actually will create problems, because clearly, while per capita GDP, as I said, is really way below $3,000, which means you're really a developing country.
Yeah.
And $3,000 per capita is also reflects very big inequality within.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of those issues came up in the election.
Yeah.
You have a small elite at the top,
which
makes humongous money, is globalized, is well connected, have cruise weddings, but at the bottom there is a problem. So I think that question that, look, we have a huge amount of domestic agenda, of developmental agenda. I think we need to focus on that and not to forget that would be to simply think a small elite at the top thinks we've arrived and we can change the world, which I think is an illusion. But my sense is the dangers of overreach hopefully will be recognized. And as Deng Xiaoping famously said about China, look, keep your head down, build yourself up. We have at least, even if we talk about the Amrit Kal that the Prime Minister Modi talks about, for the next 20 years, our focus should be on building ourselves, creating national capabilities, reducing inequalities, bringing greater prosperity, rather than proclaiming ourselves as a great power, because the history is littered with countries that they thought they were climbing up the greasy pole, but found themselves suddenly back down because you claimed too early and made mistakes through complacence and overreach.
Thank you so much. So everyone read the piece on the indianexpress.com. It should also be a link wherever you're watching the video, there should be a link in the description. It has lots of stuff. I didn't even get to Africa and Europe outreaches, but you should read the piece. Thank you so much.